Okay, so we've conquered GDP, which is a major macro variable that measures the value, the dollar amount of the economy. We have a couple more macro variables we want to understand, and right now we're going to talk about unemployment. There are several surveys. There's a establishment survey, which is the one that they can get the data on how many jobs have been created in the last time period. You'll hear that number reported in the headlines. And then the one we're going to talk about is the household survey. And from the household survey, they get the data they need to calculate the unemployment rate that you hear mentioned in the news. So the Census Bureau conducts a survey of 60,000 households. They ask them a series of questions so that everybody will be categorized into one description or type of employment or unemployment. And then the Bureau of Labor Statistics uses this data to actually calculate the unemployment rate. But first, right now, we just want to focus on this whole categorizing system. The first thing that's going to happen is the people, first of all, you just have citizens in the country, right? So of all the people who are in the country, we want to limit the survey to what is called the working age population. Working age population. All right, so who does that include? By the definition that they're using, the working age population is those who are at least 16 years old. So there is a minimum age, but there's no maximum age, okay? So everybody's 16 and older. It has to be the civilian population, so the military is not included in this. They're not included as employed or unemployed. They're just not part of the survey. And they have to be non-institutionalized, and that just means not in prison or some sort of mental health institution, somewhere where they're off out of the population, okay? So out of all the people in the country, when we hear the unemployment rate, it's technically only applying to the civilian 16-year and older and non-institutionalized group of people. So that's our big group. So everybody that's going to be used in this calculation is in this box. And then so the next thing they have to do is to divide this into, are you in the labor force or are you not in the labor force? So let's see here. We're going to do not in labor force on this side, and in the labor force on this side. Okay, so let's just focus on being in the labor force. What makes you in the labor force? Quite simply, it means that you meet the definition to be unemployed or you meet the definition to be employed. If you do not meet the definition to be employed or unemployed, then by definition, boom, you're going to be over here not in the labor force, okay? So let's talk about the definition of employed and unemployed. What we're looking for is an answer to the question, have you worked for money for at least 1 hour in the past, I think it's in the past week. And if your answer, or maybe it's in the past 4 weeks, and if your answer to that question is yes, you are employed. It doesn't matter if you would prefer to work more hours, or if you don't like your job, or you feel underused. As long as you're working for money, you're considered employed. What makes you unemployed? Well, clearly you're not working. But what's also important is that you are actively looking for a job, which is generally described as having looked for a job in the last 4 weeks. So if you're not working and you do want a job, but you aren't actually out there really looking actively, then you're not going to be unemployed. You're actually going to be not in the labor force, okay? All right, so that's it for the labor force. When we get to the unemployment calculation, all it's doing is, and I'll show you the formula in a minute, but all it's doing is using this data, specifically the number of people unemployed as a percentage of the labor force. How many people who qualify as being in the labor force are not currently working, who are unemployed? That's your unemployment number that you hear reported. All right, let's go and turn our attention to not in the labor force. First category break we're going to make is why you're not in the labor force, or more specifically, do you have any interest in a job at all? So if the answer to that question is no, I'm not looking for a job at all, then the category you're going to be in is not available for work. Okay, so when we think back to the question they're asking, have you worked for pay in the last hour, have you worked for pay for at least an hour over the last 4 weeks? And you answer no, and they keep asking questions to figure out why you're not working. They're going to get to the point that you're saying, I'm not going to take a job even if it's offered to me. And it's actually quite a large category, understandably. Generally smaller than the entire labor force, but still there's a lot of people who for various reasons are not looking for a job. All right, so those people aren't going to show up in any of our calculations. But this next category is important when we start looking at some of the broader definitions of unemployment. And these are people who are available for work. So one category is not available for work, and this group is available for work. And so then we divide them into two groups also. And then this will be our last categories that we'll look at here. So you're available for work, but you're not in the labor force. So what's going on? These people can be broken into two groups. And one has the title of discouraged workers. I think I left an A out there. Discouraged workers. And discouraged workers are people who probably themselves think of themselves as unemployed. They feel like, I'd like to work. Remember, they are available for work, but they're not finding a job. The reason they're not in the unemployed category is they cannot say that they have looked actively for a job. They have not looked in the last 4 weeks. They might have looked in the last 12 months, but not in the last 4 weeks. These are people who feel like there's no job out there. There's no point in looking. When we go through the business cycle and we go through a recession and there's a lot of unemployment, what we see happen a lot of times is as people get more discouraged if there's anything out there, is they fall out of the unemployment category by the definitions we're using here, because they're not actively looking and they find themselves being categorized over here. And then by the same token, as we start to come out of a recession and the employment actually, or the number of jobs is starting to grow, people will start actively looking. They'll start being pulled over into the unemployment category because now they're actively looking. And so one of the things we see in the data is as we come out of a recession and things are actually doing better, we actually do see the number of people unemployed increase. Simply because of this movement here at the discouraged workers. One of the criticisms that was, I don't want to say criticisms, but observations that was made during our most recent recession, and it's probably in the news all the time when we're coming out of a recession, is as you see the employment rate maybe not being so bad, people would comment of why is the unemployment rate not so high when it seems like there's a lot of people not working? And it was this discouraged worker category. This last recession we had was pretty severe, and a lot of people fell out of the labor force and into the discouraged worker category. Now this last box is not really one I can sum up too easily, but the idea is you're available for work, but there's something blocking you, and it can be, I'll just put other reasons here because I don't have much room to write. So these are people who would say, I'd like to have a job, but I don't have a car, but I don't have someone to watch my child, or there's some other issue. So they would take a job if offered, and everything else was solved as a problem. So that's why they're not in the not available for work group. But there's something blocking them, and it's not just being discouraged. So they separate these two out. All right, so that sums up our various categories of of how to categorize our working age population. So we want to use this information to actually learn how to calculate the unemployment rate.